follow them around. You know how to zoom in, zoom out. It's simple, you know.
Yeah.
You can even start recording now. There's plenty of room and battery. But
Okay, sure.
if there's ever a break, you know what to do.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, he just wanted to.
We're going to start on Islamic time.
All right.
You know, Ivan would never believe that. Once I was asked to do a wedding for a couple, so they came to my office, and as they were going through their papers, I saw two invitation cards. One had on it that the wedding would start at 8:30 and one 7:30. So I said, guys, it seems you made a mistake here. She said, no, Imam. The one that says 7:30 is meant for whom? For Arabs. Because they're always 1 hour late.
I thought it was for Palestine.
For Palestinians, oh my God, I cannot make fun of myself. And that's what I'm trying to do, Ivan. Maybe Syrians. How are you? Well, good to see you all. You know, I planned for a 15 students kind of discussion, not for this wonderful gathering, mashallah, you know. How many people? At least 70, 80, 90. That's good news. And to have Ivan with me is another challenge. She will give me a hard time today, or maybe I will give her a hard time. I hope you enjoyed the Pakistani or Pakistani. Is it Pakistani or Pakistani? Pakistani food. Was it spicy? But well, I'm sorry, where is Nazir? Nazir was throwing you out of campus ministry. The food was too spicy. Okay, well, I really want to thank Nazir who made this happen. Without him, this would not have happened. So give him a big hand. He has been working tirelessly. Knowing even, is Balkis here? You know, his wife is pregnant and this is their first child. So to have him here and doing all of this work is an honor for us. Thank you. Also, our two interns, Muslim interns, where is Salih and Burhan? And the MSA.
Yes, the MSA is the back.
The MSA. Okay, well, the women of the Quran, it's not women in the Quran, because I am not going to talk about how the Quran treats the issue of women in general. That's a big topic. I'm not going to talk about the details of theology and law and inheritance and all of kind of. I'm going to talk about, and my focus is, how does the Quran speak of specific women? How does the Quran treat narratives on specific women? The idea for me in my mind is to help you understand how the Quran directs women, nothing more, nothing less. But also understand the perspective that Imams use, educated Imams, because there are sets of educated Imams in the community, when they speak about women. But also I want to help you understand where the misunderstanding happens within the Muslim community when they talk about women in Islam. We will have a break in about, what, half an hour?
40 minutes.
40 minutes. We'll have coffee, tea, whatever it is that Nazir has prepared for us. And we'll do Maghrib then, inshallah. This is not going to be a very academic, if you will, discussion. Some of it is really speaking from my own experience as someone who studied tafsir Quranic interpretation back in college. Now, before I do that, I want to just point your attention that I have a few books here I would like you to look at, not take out of the room. If you do, something will happen to you. You will be possessed by jinn, you know.
Will it involve death and torturous pain?
And torturous pain. Now, this is a 4 volumes book called تحرير المرأة في عصر الرسالة. I hope you have seen it, Ivan.
I have a copy.
It's a good book with a lot of data, historic data on women in Islamic history, a lot of data on how Hadith and Quran deals with women, a lot of data that can be really helpful for anyone who's doing any study on women in Islam. I have here a few books on women disciples of Muhammad, Sahaba. I know not everyone here is Muslim, not everyone here knows about specific terms, so I'm going to be jumping back and forth. Sahabiyat, disciples of Prophet Muhammad, or upon him be peace, or women who lived at the time of the Prophet. There are a few books, you can look at them. A few books on the Quran itself, Quran from guidance from the Quran, specific interpretations of specific verses, and focusing on specific themes in the Quran. Some basic themes in the Quran: universe, marriage, law, and soul. The Quran, a user's guide, a very good book on understanding the Quran. Understanding the Quran, a contemporary approach by Mustafa Mahmoud, where he has, I think, 5 themes. I read the book some time ago. 13 different themes that he discusses in his book. I would want you to look at these books when you have the time. Role of Muslim Women in Society by Afzal Rahman. I have my own critical perspective on this specific book, but I think it's a good book to read. It gives you sort of the traditional understanding of gender and women in Islam that you may not see in this book, Quran and Women by Amina Wadood. And it's a very good book. I think she did a lot of research to write this small book, but it has a lot of value in it. I know some professors use it here at Georgetown University. A very good book. And some other books I would want you to read and look at. In terms of the Quran, the story of the Quran, its history and place in Muslim life by Ingrid Matheson. A wonderful book to read on the Quran. And lastly, The Mind Al-Quran Builds. It's a translation from a book that was written in Arabic. It talks about what is the main focus of the Quran as understood by Muslims, as understood by Muslims. I also here have some DVDs and CDs that I produced on women and gender in Islam. If you're interested, you can buy it. Any question before we proceed? Okay, let's turn the light.
Like this? Okay, good.
As we move into the subject, for a few minutes I want to address the Quran itself, because we are studying women in the Quran. And one of the problems people make, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, all the time is when they study women in Islam, they overlook how the Quran should be treated, how the Quran should be interpreted, how these stories should be understood. You don't just open the Quran on your own and decide, well, let me understand this verse to mean 1, 2, 3. There is a specific method that scholars of tafsir, scholars of exegesis use to interpret these stories. You don't just open it and decide, well, it says La ilaha illallah. It's not like that. So these are the specific things that we use to interpret the Quran. Specific methods. Things that you have to keep in mind. Number one, what is called Asbabun Nuzul, or the causes of revelation. That is the socio-political context in which the Quran came about. What does that mean? The Quran was, Muslims use the term revealed, because we believe that God revealed this book unto Prophet Muhammad. It was revealed to address a specific socio-political situation, circumstances. And unless we understand those circumstances, we fail to make sense of those stories and of that book. Very simple stuff. You cannot just open the Bible and try to make sense of the specific verses in it without understanding the socio-political context of those verses. And those pastors who do that end up doing injustice to the Bible. The same thing happened in the case of Islam, in the case of Muslims. We just open the book and decide, well, you see what the verse says? It's not enough. You have to always go back to the socio-political context in which that revelation came about, in which that book came about. What was intended by those stories? The knowledge of the Meccan and the Medinan revelation. What do I mean by that? By the way, I used this slide in the other presentation we did in the spring, so some of you who came to that presentation, this is repeated from that seminar. The Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad over the course of 23 years. 13 in the city of Mecca and 10 in the city of Medina. Meccan verses look different, sound different, and address different topics from Medinan verses. Very different. An example. Meccan verses are very, very short. Medinan verses are relatively long. Meccan verses deal with theology. No law, only theology, creed, belief. It talks a lot about the day of judgment. It talks a lot about prophets. While in Medina we have a lot of ethics and law. You see that? You see now? So now you can find on your own, you open any page in the Quran, and oh, I can tell this talks about inheritance, so it must be Medina. Or no, this talks only about theology. It must be Meccan. Okay? Why is that important? If the verse is intended to talk about theology, you don't try to derive law out of it. Very simple stuff. And that's what Muslims do all the time, mistakenly. They try to derive specific legal norms, teachings, out of a verse that is meant to be only theology. And by doing so, they're making a mistake. Are you with me so far? Good. The knowledge of various forms of revelation. This talks about how the Quran can be recited in different ways and sounds. I'll give you an example. When you read Surah Al-Fatiha, if you happen to pray in West Africa, this is what you hear. Maliki Yawmiddin, which means the king of the day of judgment. If you go to Pakistan or Turkey, what do you hear? Maliki Yawmiddin. You see the difference? Malik means the owner, and Malik means the king. We Muslims would say that it was revealed unto Muhammad in both ways. Malik and Malik, which means according to Islam, according to us Imams, according to the tradition we use, the angel, when he came down to Muhammad, he once recited saying, Maliki Yawmiddin, and one said Maliki Yawmiddin. So both are intended to be within the revelation. If you are praying, you use either this or that. And there are so many of these different qira'at, different readings within the Quran. If you don't know these qira'at and their readings, you end up making different interpretations and sometimes wrong interpretations. You see where I'm coming from? Sometimes you end up giving the very opposite meaning that was initially intended by the verse. In Nasakh, the understanding of its abrogated rulings, the idea here is those verses are in the Quran, continue to be in the Quran. There are understandings by some Muslim scholars that earlier revelations that may look contrary to later revelations have been abrogated by later revelations. Give an example of what that means. There's a verse in the Quran that says, do not approach your prayer while drunk. What does that mean? Can you interpret for me? Yeah, try. Do not approach your prayer while drunk. What does that mean or may mean?
I don't know.
It may mean, I'll make it easy on you. It may mean you can still be drunk, but when you pray, make sure that you are not drunk at that moment. So make sure that you drink much before you go to prayer. You have another verse that says, do not drink. So you have one that says, give it up completely, and one says, do not pray while drunk. When you first look at these two verses, they sound what? Contrary to each other. So what do? Now, how do we, scholars of tafsir, of exegesis, deal with that? We say, and you see that within the literature that is written on the Quran, we say that the Quran, or in this case God, who knows what is good and bad for us, knows simply that you cannot tell people who have been drinking for 20 years to give up on drinking. That's exactly what they do now. Doctors, if you are alcoholic or on drugs, they put you in a specific program that will help you give up on it, what? Gradually. So one cannot anymore say, well, I'm going to follow the first ayah, the first verse. I follow the second ayah that abrogated in ruling the first verse. Am I clear in that? However, the presence of that verse is quite very important. Why? It teaches you wisdom of how to best help your child or your brother or your sister get rid of a bad habit. You don't ask them to give up a bad habit overnight. You help them go through it what? Gradually. This is what I mean. There's few verses like that that people struggle with in terms of nasakh, in terms of abrogation. I'm going to go for the sake of time. Later down, you look at muhkam and mutashabih. Muhkam is a verse that is clear cut, has only one meaning. You read a specific verse and it has only one interpretation. Vis-a-vis, mutashabih means ambiguous. You look at a verse and say, wait a minute, what does this really mean? So you have 5 people who are knowledgeable in Arabic, might give you 5 different interpretations. So the Quran itself tells us in chapter 3 that within it there are 2 kinds of verses. Some that are mutashabih, ambiguous, and some that are what? Are muhkam, are clear-cut, one meaning to them. The goal of the scholar, in this case, is to make sense of the mutashabih. What and how, what do you do and how do you do that? You do that using all of those things that I have been speaking about. And you use about what's called am and khas, general and specific, mutlaq and muqayyad, sort of limited in meaning or open to interpretation. Am I clear so far? For example, you find a verse in the Quran that seems to be very, very positive about the Jews and the Christians. And there's so many like that. Actually, 99.9% of the verses that talk about the Jews and the Christians are very positive. But you come across specific ones that seem to be negative. So how do you make sense of that? How do you make sense of that? The ones that are positive are general, which means generally Muslims and Jews and the Christians are supposed to be in a love relationship, in a respect relationship, in a tolerance relationship. However, the Quran seems to be addressing or defining specific individuals who happened to be Jews or happened to be Christians who misbehaved with specific experiences. The Quran is saying those kinds of people, not because they are Jews and Christians, because of what they did, you need not to interact with them in such a fashion. You see where I'm coming from? So generally, you marry Jews and Christians, you eat with them and you travel with them and they are your friends and this and that, agreed upon. This is the general ruling. But there are specific rules of specific individuals who happened to be, so I told you about this asbab al-nuzul, the socio-political context, that limit that specific verse usage to specific individuals. For example, was it Islam behind September 11? Or was it individuals who happened to be from a Muslim background? You see the difference? Terry Jones, was he acting on behalf of his Christianity, and therefore all of Christianity is anti the Quran? Or he happened to be a Christian, and therefore you shun him, not because he's a Christian, because of what he did, however he happens to be a Christian. You see the difference here? That's what I mean by am and khas, mutlaq and muqayyad, specific and general. The grammar, meaning the Arabic, and I'm sure some of you have studied or are studying Arabic. How many of you are studying Arabic here at Georgetown? Arabic grammar. I'm going to ask you a question.
Oh, no.
What is the longest sentence in Arabic? How long can a sentence be in Arabic?
Infinitely long?
A sentence in Arabic could be as long as 5 pages. What does that mean? Within every sentence you have to have a verb, an object, and a subject, okay? So you look into so many sentences where you don't have the object. And you look for the object, and you find it where? 5 pages down the book. Or sometimes you find that object in a chapter at the end of the chapter that comes before that specific chapter. It's quite strange, but this is how Arabic is designed. Sometimes the object or the subject is 4 or 5 pages, or 1 page, or half a page, or 2 lines down, or before. You see where I'm coming from? So when you do interpretation of the Quran, you have to have good command of Arabic grammar that will help you put the sentence together to interpret it in the right way. Any question about this stuff before we move forward? Before we get into the stories? Dive into the stories. Okay. I'm now gonna talk for 10 minutes before we take the break about main objectives of the Quran, the goals of the Quran. What does the Quran want us to do, want us to think? Then that will help us understand the stories of women in the Quran. You see why I'm doing this? We cannot take those stories out of context. We have to put them in context, in light of the context. Meaning, to make sense of the whole story, you have to put in the context of the Quran. What does the Quran want you to understand from those stories in general? Main objectives of the Quran, a new paradigms on faith and the creed through Tawheed, Every story in the Quran wants you to come out with one thing, that there's one God. Not two, not three, not five, there's one God, and that God is the God of Abraham. Okay? So you see that throughout all the stories, whether, as we will see, whether we're talking about Mary, or talking about Balqis, or talking about Aisha, or talking about Khawla, or any other woman of the Quran, we will see one main theme: God's oneness. Number two, affirmation of human rights and dignity. Number three, how can the story contribute to spiritual empowerment? Number four, building a witnessing ummah, community, unto humanity with a message of moderation and unity. A message that is godly, made by God. Calling for a world that is humane and in coordination through freedom, justice, peace, and forgiveness. You'll see these specific terms as we move into the stories after the break. These specific terms, from humane to forgiveness to peace to justice to freedom. You need to keep these objectives in mind. Building a family that is united and filled with justice. So when we move into the story of Abraham and move into the story of Sarah and Hagar, we will see that. So the story of Sarah and Hajar in Arabic are meant to tell us that a family that is not built on justice, absolute partnership, spiritually and physically, cannot be called a family. And you will see that. So a good family is built upon spiritual foundation and justice and partnership. You will see that in the story. But all of that has to happen in light of that, what I call the Tawheedi paradigm of Islam, the oneness of God. Everything has to happen in light of that belief in the one God. For the sake of time, I want to move forward. General characteristics of Quranic paradigms. I want to move all the way to the last one for the sake of time. Rational and reasonable. I say if your interpretation or the interpretation of X on YouTube is not rational and is not reasonable, I always say this is my understanding of the Quran. Again, by that's my understanding. I say it's not right. If it does not make sense, and if it's not reasonable, if it does not speak to the human nature and to the human needs, this is why it says realistic. The story has to address the realistic needs of human beings, has to be balanced, has to deal with all the life of the human being, has to be reasonable, has to be rational. If it's not that, then it's not the right, correct interpretation of that verse. Now, what has the problem been? If that's the case, and if we have a specific way by which we interpret the Quran, I tell Muslims now, the problem has been that we have misread the language of the Quran. We have not understood the Arabic language of the Quran. So Yvonne would bring me to her office and say, Imam Hindi, so what does awliya mean? That the Jews and the Christians cannot be taken as awliya. So you open Yusuf Ali interpretation, says, well, it means friends. That all Muslims, you cannot take the Jews and the Christians as friends. Don't put that on YouTube and cut and paste, I'll be in trouble. But that's exactly what we do. You know, that cutting and pasting, we all have been doing that for centuries. Cutting and pasting. I said, no, wait a minute. But the Quran also says that you can marry a Christian or a Jew. Well, how can, and the Quran also says that marriage is built on mawadda, on love. Now, we have a Christian, and I marry a Christian, and my marriage is built on love and affection, and the Quran says you can marry a Christian. But in the other verse, you cannot take the Jews and the Christians as friends. It does not hold. You see where I'm coming from? So something is wrong. So Muslims have misunderstood what the term awliya mean, and therefore misinterpreted the verse and gave it a specific ethical teaching that does not really speak to what the Quran is really speaking about. You see where I'm coming from? Am I clear? Good. Reading it in the time what I call of backwardness, I say to Muslims all the time, when the Quran was revealed 1,433 years ago and spoke about women's rights, no other religious community at that time was as progressive, as open, as liberal to the issues of women as the Quran was. What do I mean by that? You see in the Quran talking about how women are able to inherit something that did not exist before. That was very progressive thinking in the 7th century. Okay? So what I'm saying is the mind of the Quran was trying to get Muslims at that time to become progressive on issues of women. But how far can you be? As far as the society could handle at the moment. You see where I'm coming from? Am I clear? So if the Quran's main intention was to be progressive, open, and open the minds of men and women about women's issues, to the point of calling the husband and wife as zawj, partners, and nisa'u shaqa'iq rijal, women are the partners of men. You see, this is a new thinking, a new legal, a new ethical, a new social, a new political way of thinking that did not exist at that time in the society in which Muhammad came about. Are you with me? So in those days, that was very progressive. So I say to Muslims in the 21st century this. Muhammad went as far as he could be in the 7th century to be ready to question specific socio-political norms when it comes to women. And he did it, and it was not easy on him. The verse that talks about what? You know, a very well-known practice that used to exist in Arabia where men would bury their daughters alive because they would be ashamed of having more daughters than they wanted. Muhammad stood against that. Women's right to inheritance, women's right to political participation. المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض يأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر. Believing men and women are the protectors of one another. They both enjoin what is good and forbid what is evil. Understood by Imam Sarakhsi to mean that women and men are absolutely equal in their ability to participate in two systems, in the judiciary and in the political system. You see where I'm coming from? Very progressive, very liberal thinking of the time. I say to Muslims, we don't need to go back and live those rules literally, but rather live the spirit of the text. Meaning, it wanted to be progressive, we have to be progressive. It wanted to be open, we have to be open. It wanted to question specific norms, we have to question and be ready to question specific norms as to how we understand gender and women and men. Are you with me? And I know some of you might be ready to want to stone me. Okay, it does not anger me. Because what I'm saying is not what we always hear. We always hear what Imam Abu Hanifa said in the 9th century. And I say, well, but Imam Abu Hanifa lived in his own time 1200 years ago. He does not live in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America in 2012. And he does not live in Cairo, Egypt in 2012 too. You see where I'm coming from? We need to be ready to question specific norms, specific teachings, specific perceived notions of what the Quran really wanted of men and women. So understand the spirit of the text, not the literal meaning of the text. Give an example, then we'll take the break. And this is not what I am inventing. Someone with the name of Justice Aftab Hussain, who used to be the Justice of the Sharia Court of Pakistan, an amazing man, wrote a book called Women in Islamic Law. It's a 700-page book, amazing book, in which he argues, very much like Jamal al-Banna, who is still living in Cairo, wrote on this subject. Now the Quran says, listen to me carefully, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, meaning, when it comes to inheritance, the male will take 2 shares of a woman. So if we have $75, the male takes 50 and the female takes 25. When you read that verse literally, away from the context, away from the language, away from what the Quran was trying to do, then you understand it literally. 25, 50. Isn't that very easy? Very easy language. However, ulama and scholars have studied this verse in so many ways to say, listen now. So, well, in Islam, the economic system and inheritance is built upon responsibility, not gender. What does that mean? In Islam, men have more responsibilities than men. Meaning, I am financially responsible to provide for my wife, my daughters, my sons, my aunts, my mother, my father, and if anyone in my family dies, I am in charge of taking care of them. Meaning, my wife could sit in our home and decide not to work. And I would never have the right to force her to go to court, to go to job and provide for the house or pay 50-50. I cannot, legally, Islam, I cannot. Okay. So Islam said, since he has more responsibility, again, back 1400 years ago, it makes more sense to give him more money because he spends more money of that money. So he's not given more money because he's a man, but rather because he's what? Responsible for more things. So Justice Aftab Hussain argues that inheritance is responsibility-based, not gender-based. That is to say, if you go to court and as a woman prove to the court that you have more responsibility, meaning more money, more needs than the man, you will be given more. Interesting. See what I'm talking about? Now, not only Justice Aftab Hussain, Jamal al-Banna said the same thing. Abdul Karim Zidane says the same thing. And now it's becoming more of the opinion of so many scholars who say we need to ask these questions. That may not be easy to ask, but need to be asked. There's so many verses like that. So to finish, failure to understand what happened then, what was intended to happen, failure to be ready to ask the question and come up with an opinion that might look new, but still in the spirit of the text. Fail to understand the context of revelation, meaning what was intended back then vis-a-vis what is intended now. Failing to understand the Quranic themes and objectives. Meaning, one of the objectives of the Quran is to enforce what? Justice. Well, if you have a woman, and I was in Palestine recently in the summer, and I dealt with a specific inheritance case. Okay? And I said, guys, this is not justice. Look at this sister. She's taking care of her brothers, and her father, and her mother, and her ailing husband, and you are giving her much less than you are giving her brothers. This is not in line with what the Quran is trying to do. You see where I'm coming from? Imam Yahya, astaghfirullah al-azim, how dare you say that you are an imam? You have to follow the rules. What rules? I'm following the rules, the spirit of the rules, not the literal meaning of the rules. Let's take a break. Then we'll dive into the stories. Good to be back. I want to just say a few things. Number one, I know that there are people out there who would disagree with my interpretation. I'm not claiming anything else. I'm not saying this is the only. However, I'm claiming that this is an interpretation that has always existed and for 1400 years. However, many people don't talk about it. There's a book written in Arabic that I always refer to, written by the great scholar Muhammad al-Ghazali. Muhammad al-Ghazali has a book called Al-Mar'a Bayna Ahli al-Fiqh wa Ahli al-Hadith. Women between the people of fiqh and the people of hadith, in which he has a chapter called Safahatun min al-Tarikh Matwiya, forgotten pages of history. Basically what he's arguing in his book, and Muhammad Ghazali is a very well-known, no one can say that he's irrelevant, died about 12 years ago. He says that we have forgotten so many bright pages in our history where people used to sit and argue for and against and not be called names. Number two, where women were in the forefront having so many rights, political rights, economic, financial, in the judiciary, judges, and so many things. But no one talks about those women anymore, in any way, shape, and form. And I have so many books. If you come to my basement, I can show you. The other thing is, like the opinion I mentioned of the Justice Aftab Hussein, it is not what Yahya said. If you read that book, he really, it traces it back 1,000 years as to what Muslim scholars have said historically about the issue of inheritance. Very much like the issue of testimony. Is it that you have two women and for one man? So he argues, and I argue with his argument, that testimony is knowledge-based and not gender-based. That the verse was misinterpreted, I argue, by Muslims. The issue that the verse was addressing are issues about which women did not know, the women of the time did not know. Of course, I would say, if it's like now in America, what do you do when you go to a court? You have to argue that you know enough experience and enough knowledge of the case you are testifying for. They call that in the court system expert witness. And of course, the Quran would not, and I would not stand up for the Quran saying, well, yeah, women testimony has to be equal no matter what they know. No, if you know more, your testimony has more weight. And those specific issues that women were asked to testify for at that time, they did not know much about. The proof is, women testimony were taken more seriously in matters they knew more about. And there are specific cases that Professor Amira Sunburg studied and documented in her book that came out a few years ago about women. So what I'm saying is the issue of testimony is knowledge-based and not gender-based. And Sheikh Ghazali argues in his book, he says we live in a time where you go to any college or any department or any university that teaches economics, you see 50% women and 50% men. Actually, he argues, in many of these departments, women are much more educated, much smarter than the men in these colleges. That this necessarily have the base, the knowledge base, they have the experience, they run hospitals and the clinics and they run, banks and so on and so forth, and therefore they have demonstrated their ability to be relevant in the case. And that's what Islam cares about. Where he argues what I argue, that what matters in the court system in Islam is ihqaq al-haqq, as Al-Mawardi says, to assure that the truth and what is right is enforced. If that is what matters, it does not matter whether you are a man or a woman. What matters is, do you know or you don't know? Anyway, so narratives help us understand those themes. And there's so many narratives in the Quran we're about to dive in. Some are men and some are women. Narratives in the Quran introduce us to specific moral values. And what I have here, again, I'm not going to go through them or over them in details, but what I have here are verses that come at the end of stories in the Quran. So the story was meant to introduce us to specific values through those stories of women. Truthfulness, keeping one's word, justice and fair play, coordination, endurance, moderation, and forgiveness. So every time we come across a story of a woman in the Quran, I mean men and women, but you see it in the stories of women in the Quran, you see these specific values with which the story ends. Truthfulness, keeping one's word, justice and fair play, coordination with others, endurance, moderation, and forgiveness. So this is what is meant, or why we have these stories in the Quran, to learn these specific values. The specific values that the stories do not want us to espouse, such as falsehood and hypocrisy, gossip, and rumor. So the Quran speaks of specific women in the society as it does men. It says, well, there are men who were able to espouse truthfulness and honesty and justice and moderation and endurance and forgiveness. But it also talks about women, about men who practice falsehood and hypocrisy, gossip and rumor. It also gives you stories of women who practiced both. And for me that matters a lot, because the Quran, throughout its narratives, my friends, it gives you a story of a woman where she upheld the law, and a story of a man who upheld the law. Then a verse later, or two verses later, it gives you a story of a woman who did not, and a man who did not. It never only addresses women and gives up on men, or only men and gives up on women. You always see that. وَضْرِبْ لَهُ, you know, the Quran says, give them an example of the wife of Pharaoh, who was 1, 2, 3, a bad. But give them also the wife of, the wife of Lut, or Nuh, who was not good. But in the same verse, give them the example of the wife of Pharaoh, who was a believing woman. Then after that, give them the parable of the example of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Okay, so in the same context, it says women who did uphold the law, were ethical, faithful, and women who were not. Earlier in the chapter, it talks about men in the same perspective, who did uphold the law and who did not. It's telling us Muslims that men and women are absolutely equal in their ability to uphold the law or fail in honoring the law. And we'll see more of that in the coming few minutes. Again, these narratives of women give us perspective of fundamental human rights according to the Quran. And you see that in, word by word. Again, I wish there was time to go over the verses, but if you're interested, I can give you the PowerPoint and you can take the quotes, the specific chapter and the specific verse. The security of life, the right to human dignity, the right to privacy of property, freedom of belief. Now, about to get into the stories, just give me a minute. I want to also do this before we get into the actual story. In order to understand the mindset on women, you have to understand the last verses that were ever revealed in the Quran. What do I mean? If you read any of these books, what do you have? An introduction and what? A conclusion. The conclusion usually summarizes the main themes of every chapter. The last verses that were revealed in the Quran summarize the message of the Quran. Let's go through them before we get into the stories. It gives you an idea about the main focus of the Quran. And fear the day in which you will return to God, then everyone will be paid what he earned, and they will not be dealt with unjustly. O you who believe, if you contract a debt for a fixed time, write it down. The importance of documentation. You have justice, the importance of documentation. So their Lord answers them their prayers and said, never will I allow to be lost the work of any of you, be he male or female. You are members one of another. This is one of the last revelations of the Quran. God rewards men and women on equal footing. That men are from women and women are from men. Do not wish for those things which God has made some of you to excel over others. For men there is a reward for what they earned, and for women there is reward for what they have earned. So men have things that women don't, women have things that they don't. They need each other, they are in partnership. Both will be rewarded for the good they do. Indeed, Muslim men and women, the believing men and women, the obedient men and women, the truthful men and women, the patient men and women, the humble men and women, the charitable men and women, the fasting men and women, the men who guard their private parts and women who do so, and the men who remember Allah often, and the women who remember Allah often. For them all, Allah has prepared forgiveness and great reward. So the importance of this verse is that it details all the aspects of the human endeavors. And it goes man and woman, man and woman, man and woman, man and woman, man and woman. Till it says all, Allah has prepared for forgiveness and a great reward. Today I have perfected your religion for you and have completed my favor upon you and have chosen for you Islam as your way of life. Again, those are the last verses, and it matters a lot to me that the last verses of the Quran, we're not talking about war, we're talking about women and justice with women. Keep this in mind before we dive into the stories. So the conclusion of the message that Muslims fail to understand. So we are to go, where are we to go from here? We have to understand the Quran based on those objectives, those rules that we have mentioned, and go into those stories. General doctrines of women in the Quran. This is from chapter 4, a chapter that talks about women a lot. And the first verse of that chapter, O humankind, be conscious of your sustainer, who has created you out of one living entity, and out of it created its mate, and out of the two spread abroad a multitude of men and women, and remain conscious of God, in whose name you demand your rights from one another. A verse that obviously talks about how men and women come from the Arabic word nafsin wahida, living one living entity, nafsin wahida. This system that the Quran is trying to enforce in this verse, according to Malik bin Nabi, Muhammad al-Ghazali, and Hassan al-Turabi, he says it's a Tawhidi paradigm that is governed by three principles. A system based on the superiority of God, not of men over women or women over men. A system found on Adl Ilahi Mutlaq, full, divine, absolute justice. Divine absolute justice, not built on partiality, that God does not stand up for men on the expense of women. A system based on the liberation of human beings from being servants to one another to being the servants of God, if you will. That is to say, women are not to be servants to men. women serve God and men serve God too on equal footing. Women and gender in the Quran, your wives are as garments for you and you are garments for them, completing one another, protecting each other. And amongst God's wonders is that God creates for you mates out of your own kind so that you might incline towards them, and He engenders love and tenderness between you. Women and gender in the Quran, in accordance with justice, the rights of the wives with regard to their husbands are equal to the husband's rights with regard to them. The marriage may be resumed in fairness or dissolved in a goodly manner. O you who have faith, it is not lawful for you to try to inherit your wives by holding them against their will, and neither shall you keep them under constraint with a view to taking away anything you have given them. Consort with your wives in a goodly manner. Now the stories. So we have discussed the paradigms, the main ideas, main values. I have written a paper on this. It's about 50 pages on the stories of women in the Quran. I'm not going to go over all of them. I have here 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 17 stories of women. I just selected some of them for you, and very briefly, very briefly. Eve. In Arabic, Hawa, the verse that we mentioned earlier, 2 minutes ago, is also mentioned here in the story of Eve. O mankind, be conscious of your sustainer who has created you out of the one living entity, and out of it created its mate, and out of the two spread abroad a multitude of men and women, and remain conscious of God, in whose name you demand your rights from one another. Many scholars, not all, argue against the narrative that women were created from the rib of Adam, and I believe myself that that story is not fully Islamic or Quranic. But the Quran does not say that women came or Eve was created from the rib of Adam. The Quran does not mention that. The Quran, according to this verse that I just recited, mentioned that men and women, Adam and Eve, came from nafsin wahida. William Chittick, the author of the Vision of Islam, says nafsin wahida means the same essence. And one finds hadith that would support that argument. The hadith says that God took a handful of dust from different places on earth, put them together, a pile, and said be, and it became Adam and Eve at the same time. I like that argument of William Chittick and Muhammad Asad and many others like Alusi, because it uses this word nafsin wahida and takes it seriously, that both were created at the same time. Number 2, not one from the other. Number 3, both were created with the same order, B. That is to say, both they came into existence at the same time, and as we will see in a minute, God spoke to both of them on equal footing, not one through the other. Now this becomes important for me when I speak about the theology of women and gender in Islam, because I said from the very beginning of the story of the creation, the Quran seems to enforce the idea that men and women are absolutely equal from the very beginning. Now I always make the joke. Are you willing to take this joke? The joke says, if you look at this line, you have white, you have black, you have brown, you have tall, you have short, you have everything you can imagine. Huh? But I'm sure if you have a psychologist here who would just interview every one of these people here, we would have someone who's stubborn, someone who's easygoing, and someone who's in between. Huh? This represents that essence from which we were created. If God took a handful of dust from all kinds of places and put it together, we represent the Rocky Mountains, we represent the sands of Wilmington, North Carolina, and we represent the mountains of Smoky Mountains and everything in between. So some of us are loose, easygoing. Some are stubborn and hard-headed. God, you don't want to marry that kind of person. I'm telling you, so it's good to marry someone stubborn, trust me. We'll talk about this after the class, okay? We represent that diversity from which we were created according to that story. Okay, so that's the most important thing in the story here. And we said, "Oh Adam, dwell you and your wife." So here, in order Elia comes that God spoke to both of them at the same time. Here, he says, "Oh Adam, dwell you and your wife in paradise, and eat therefrom in ease and abundance from wherever you will. But do not approach this tree, lest you be among the wrongdoers." Someone said, "Well, why would the Quran here address men through whom you go to women?" The most amazing interpretation I heard. You know why? That God can talk to women directly and women would listen. Men are always stubborn. You need to go to them and repeat yourself 20 times for them to understand what it is that you are talking about. You don't like it? I know men don't like that, huh? Women like that, huh? Anyway, but obviously God in some verses speaks to both of them, as we will see. In other verses, God speaks to Eve through Adam. So he made them fall. He, the devil, through deception. And when they tasted of the tree, their private parts became apparent to them. And they began to fasten together over themselves from the leaves of paradise. And their Lord called to them again. So here God speaks to both of them at the same time. Does not speak to Adam only or to Eve only, speaks to both of them. The Quran in Arabic says, "La ta'kula," you both do not eat from that tree. Did I not forbid you from that tree and tell you that Satan is to you a clear enemy? So there are so many things about the story of Eve in the Quran. These are the two things I wanted to point out. Number one, that God speaks to both of them at the same time. Both were created at the same time with the same command. And both fell into the trap that was designed by the devil. That is to say, both men and women are ready and can fall into sin, and both are able to ask for forgiveness at the same time. So there are natural, equal capabilities either way. Now, why is this also important? In my understanding of gender in Islam, historically, women were always blamed, just a second, were always blamed for what men do. So it's woe to you, O Eve, it's because of you have sin occurred on earth. According to this Quranic story, that's not the case. Both of them fell on their own. In another verse in the Quran it says, "Kullu nafsin bima kasabat rahina," every soul is held accountable for what each soul does. That is to say, we cannot blame men for what women do, and we cannot blame women for what men do. Each person is accountable on his and her own. This is where, for me, where gender really comes into perspective. For me, this is the lens through which we understand gender issues in Islam, according to me. If it is the most important story that the Quran mentions, and seems to be repeated in the Quran so many times in so many places, with the same focus and emphasis, it has to be held and taken seriously. Any question? Yes?
Could you explain why the pronoun we is used in the first line and
What the pronoun? We?
yeah.
Well, if you ask many people, linguists, they will say it's the royal we. In English, we, the royal we. It's the God, the royal, the king. God speaks of him, of God's self as we. Not because God is a plural, but rather because God is the greatest of all. Okay, so this is the story of Eve. Again, not everything, but this is the most important thing in the story of Eve in the Quran. Yes, sister in the back.
The paper that you said you had.
Sister, I'm very old. I'm old, about 80 years of
The
age.
paper
I don't
that
listen
you
here.
have that you said has 17 stories in it, does it have the hadith that you're talking about, the dust? Is that contained in that one?
Yes, yes, sister.
Okay, is that paper?
Yes, there is a book written by Imam Tirmidhi called Ishrat al-Nisa, in which that book is mentioned, in that hadith is mentioned.
Okay,
Yes.
is it in your paper that you have tonight?
No. No.
Is that paper about?
My paper is only on the Quran, and it does not use any hadith material.
Okay.
Wanting to be exclusively Quranic based, but in other writings I have included hadith writings on this issue. Okay? Another story. Sarah, the wife of Abraham. Again, there's so much about Sarah in the Quran. Sarah is mentioned in this specific narration, in this specific verse, as being a woman who stands up for justice. And when our messengers came to Abraham, meaning the angels, with the good tidings, they said, indeed, we will destroy the people of that lost city. Indeed, its people have been wrongdoers. According to this narrative, what it pleased Sarah is that injustice came to an end. And because of her stance for justice, according to Alusi, and his wife was standing, and she smiled. Then we gave her good tidings for Isaac, and after Isaac, Jacob. So this is a very small narrative of Sarah, who is mentioned as a woman who was faithful, who was a woman of justice, who was very much engaged in the community. I like Muhammad Abdu. When he talks about this verse, he says Sarah was not sitting at home doing nothing. She was in the business of Abraham outside. She was not in the kitchen cooking. She was standing there, she saw the angels, she was a part of the whole experience. She engaged with Abraham intellectually and in discussion, open discussion about what was going on. So the Quran does not present her as a woman who was sitting in her home cooking, but rather fully engaged in the affairs of the community. Hajar is the second wife of Abraham. Our Lord, this is the prayer of Abraham himself, I have settled some of my descendants in an cultivated valley near your sacred house, our Lord, that they may establish prayer. So make hearts among the people inclined towards them, and provide for them from the fruits that they might be grateful. This story of Hajar, I only selected one verse for the sake of time. Hajar is represented in the Quran as a woman of faith who, the story is so big. Let me tell you the story. The Muslims might know the story very well. The non-Muslims here might not know. The story is very briefly. The Islamic story of Hajar is that he married Hajar, and there is a huge debate within Islamic literature as to the origin of Hajar. Was she a slave, or was she a free woman he married? I did a study myself on this. It took me about 2 years. And I found writings within Islamic literature, but also within Jewish midrashim, Jewish literature, to say that actually Hajar comes from a Yemenite background. I know this might be the first time you ever hear that, but this is my own belief after my own research. That some people get from Yemen.
Yeah.
Some people think that Hajar comes from Egypt, and she was a slave in the house of Sarah. And when she could not have children, Sarah asked Abraham either to sleep with her or marry her. Depends on the narrative you read within the Bible here. I found so many writings tracing Hajar back to Yemen, who actually ended up in Palestine with trade. A business trip, she ended up in Palestine. Of course, this is the Arab narrative. It has to be the Arab narrative. So would you take the Jewish Israelite narrative, or the biblical, or the Quranic narrative, or the Muslim narrative? Take any one you want, you know? You can take either, neither, or fabricate your own story. But within Islamic literature, there's that belief that Abraham married Hajar hoping for a child. Now she was able to become pregnant, then she gave birth to Ishmael. According to the Quranic interpretation of the story, there was no unfaithfulness on the part of Hajar. And there was no jealousy on behalf of Sarah. The Islamic narrative is God wanted Abraham, his wife Hajar, and his son Ishmael to be in Mecca to establish what? The Kaaba, the house of worship in Mecca. Nothing more, nothing less. It was divine command, hoping that they would establish the Kaaba, they would live there, they would start the Arab tribe from which Islam would emerge. Okay? Now, when you take the biblical story, the Quranic story, it's up to you. As a Muslim, I feel more comfortable with the Islamic story, of course, you know? Because for me, it attributes no evil or wrongdoing to either woman. It does not say that Sarah was jealous or that Hajar was unfaithful to her owner. It attributes the actions to divine will. God wanted the Jews to stay here, the Arabs to stay here, and to multiply and establish their faith thereafter. Now, later the story talks about how Hajar was sitting in a specific place looking for or searching for water for her son, because it was, of course, the summer and the desert of Arabia. Looking, finally a spring of water comes out that becomes Zamzam water, from which Muslims drink when they go to Hajj. Okay? Now, the story of the Quran talks about how Hajar was faithful, surrendered her will to God in the midst of a heated Arabian desert. But every time you trust God, God pay you in full. And what a better pay than having that spring of water comes out in the middle of the heated desert of Arabia. And what a better pay than having a multitude of tribes emerging from this small family that continue to exist all the way up to now. And therefore Hajar is presented as a faithful woman who trusted God. But also the story in Hadith now, not in Quran, in Hadith, says there are some references to it in the Quran, if you put both of them together, that says that the devil did not want Abraham to sacrifice his son. So the devil here goes to Abraham and says, Abraham, how dare you do that? You're crazy nuts. This is my language. Crazy nuts, you know. And Abraham said, no, God says so. I have to do it. No, how can you do it? He's your son. Man, how can you do that? You cannot do that. Abraham continued to move forward because this is the divine command. Now, the devil goes to whom? Goes to the mother. He says, Hajar, do you know what your husband is doing? He's taking your son that you have been waiting for and with whom you are living in this desert to sacrifice him. Go and forbid him from doing that. And Hajar says, no. If he says this is the command of God, let it be. Who am I not to surrender to the demand of my Lord? So now she gives in to the plan of the family. In my Eid sermon, I use this to talk about family values. That I say a good family is a family that sticks together and it prays together and thinks together. If the husband is here and the wife is here and the kids are everywhere, that family will never continue to exist. But if the husband and the wife and the children are all on board, open, consulting one another, loving, caring for one another, catering for each other, that family continues to what? To exist. A family has to be in love with one another to continue to be a family. Okay, so you have this story now. So Hajar said, well, if that's the will of God, I go with the will of my husband. Yes?
Sorry, could you finish the story in case of misunderstanding?
I'm going to.
The Abraham's story?
Yeah, I'm finishing it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's a big story, my friend. There's no time. Now he goes to whom? The third. He failed with Abraham. He failed with the wife. Now let me distract the kids. You know, the father does not want computer. The mother does not want computer. Let me go to the kids. They end up buying iPad and iPod and this and that and corrupting the house. And he goes to Ishmael. Ishmael, do you like iPads? No, I don't. No, they're good for you. They have games on them. No, I don't like iPad. No, but the modern narrative of the story now. No, he goes to Ishmael, says, do you know where your father is taking you? Where? He said that his Lord ordered him to sacrifice you. And Ishmael says, if that is the will of my God, I surrender too. And if that's my father, I'm with the heart of my father, surrendering one's will to the will of God. And here is where the devil gives up and says, well, I have no power on people who are in love with God. That's when God replaced the child, Ishmael, in this case, with the goat or the sheep, okay? Now let me ask you a question. Does the Quran mention the name of the sacrifice? No. Actually, the name of the sacrifice comes in hadith literature, not in Quranic, not in the Quran. So according to only the Quran, exclusively, the Quran does not mention the name of the sacrifice. The name of the sacrifice could have been Isaac and could have been Ishmael. It does not matter who the sacrifice was. What matters what? The very act of surrendering to God's will. Okay? Now when I talk about this story, I talk about it from a different perspective also. I say, what does your son or your daughter mean to you if you have been waiting for them for 80 years? They mean the world to you. Angela, you know that, yeah? You have two wonderful cats. You know what I'm talking about. You know? They mean the world to you. And here is God asking you to give up on someone who is the world to you. Is God crazy to do that? No. What is the most important thing to you and to me and to us? I believe it's I. The most important thing to me is I. My arrogance, my egotism, my self-centeredness. God is asking us in the story of Abraham to sacrifice our ego for the glory of God. So I tell the Jews, the Christians and the Muslims in that crazy place where they have been killing one another for 60 years, you do not speak for God if you continue to kill one another. Sacrifice your most important ego to live in that land. God will not give that land to people who kill one another for their own ego. This is really my understanding of the story and its relevance to the day. You know? Back to the story of Hajar, we have this amazing faithful woman who was in line with God, surrendered herself to God, was wise, intelligent, smart. She was searching for a way out of a possible death because they could have died any time, any minute, because there was no water or livelihood in that land, but she continued to search. Women's ability to contribute to success. There's so many other stories. I need to finish really in 5 minutes. You have this story of Asya, the name of the wife of Pharaoh, a believing woman. The Quran presents her as an amazing believing woman, wise woman, who brought in Moses, protected him from a possible death, because Pharaoh and the Egyptians used to kill every possible Israelite in that land. So the Quran mentioned this story of Asya and the wife of Pharaoh as a believing woman, a wise woman, due to whom Moses was able to survive. The story of Mary in the Quran there's a chapter 19 in the Quran called Maryam, named after Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary is mentioned, by the way, in the Quran 34 times by name, 34 times. Do we have Christians here? We do. Christians here, do you know how many times is Mary mentioned in the Bible? Anyone would know? Don't go to Google. Don't Google it. Mary is mentioned in the Bible 17 times. 17 times. Anyway, there's a chapter, the only chapter in the Quran named after a female is chapter 19, named after Mary. Mary is also defined by some scholars of tafsir as the only female prophet. There are some Muslim theologians who argue that to be a prophet, you have to be a male. But there are Muslim theologians who argue that that is not the case. And they attribute prophecy to Mary, and they say that actually Mary was a prophet. I'm not going to go into the details of why they think that way. Well, maybe very briefly, there's the term istafa in the Quran, that's the Quran uses. And they say every time the Quran uses the word istafa, it is speaking of a prophet. And since it comes before, twice before the name of Mary, she must be a prophet too. I myself believe that she was also a prophet. Of course, in Islamic theology, to be a prophet, you have to be chosen by God, you have to have performed miracles, and also you are a sinless person. It's called in Arabic ma'soom. To be a prophet, you have to be sinless. There are so many chapters in the Quran that speak about Mary, so many verses. I only read one before I finish. But when she delivered her, meaning her mother, she said, "My Lord, I have delivered a female, and Allah was most knowing of what she delivered. And the male is not like the female." Who is saying this? The male is not like the female. It's her mother. Now, her mother vowed before she became pregnant of her, meaning Mary's mother, that she will give her to the service of the temple. But hoping what? That it will be what? A male, because it's the male who is always used to serve the temple. And here she gives birth to what? To the female. Oh my God, how can I keep my vow? She says, God, listen, I vowed to give my son to you. It ended up a female, what can I do? The female is like that. Not in the Quran, it's in the culture. Now, I saw recently a website that says, you see, women say, Islam says, men and women are not equal. And they refer to that verse, taking it out of context. Okay? So here's the mother of Mary speaking about her own culture of how females were looked down upon. Another verse about Mary, so her Lord accepted her with good acceptance and caused her to grow in a good manner and put her in the care of Zechariah. Every time Zechariah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, he found with her a provision. He said, "Oh Mary, from where is this coming to you?" She said, "It is from Allah, from God. Indeed, God provides for whom He wills without account." Obviously, God was in touch day and night with this amazing woman, Mary, who ends up becoming the mother of Jesus. There's no time to go over the whole story. I could take literally 6 months talking about the story of Mary in the Quran. And the example of Mary, the daughter of Imran, who guarded her chastity, so we blew into her garment through our angel, and she believed in the words of her Lord and his scriptures, and was of the devoutly obedient. Again, Mary spoken of as a prophet, pure, smart, intelligent, and so many other things. Another personality in the Quran called Balqis, the queen of Sheba, is a woman who used to be the queen of Sheba. The Quran presents her as a wise, intelligent, smart queen. Indeed, I found there a woman ruling them, and she has been given of all things, and she has a great throne. She said, "O eminent ones, advise me in my affair. I would not decide a matter until you witness for me. Again, I'm picking specific verses. The first verse talking about her being a queen, a leader, a political leader. So I say to Muslims who say women cannot be political leaders, I say, what do you do with this story? There are some Muslims who argue women cannot be political leaders. And I say, what do you do with this story? The Quran is presenting us with a female, with a woman who was a queen, wise, intelligent, and not only that, look here. She did not take her decisions on her own like the dictators of Egypt, okay? She sat with her consultants and said, oh, my great advisors advised me in my affair. I would not decide a matter until you witness for me, until you advise me. So she was not a corrupt leader. So the Quran presents this amazing queen, leader, who was wise, intelligent, who knew how to consult her people, how to listen to her people. So when she arrived, it was said unto her all kinds of other things. Again, this amazing woman who was smart, intelligent, she knew how to calculate her steps in her relationship with Solomon. Balqis is not in the Bible, up to my knowledge. This story is not in the Bible, up to my knowledge. But here you have a woman who was intelligent, queen, smart, intelligent, who calculated her steps with Solomon. I have to stop here. After you go through all the stories of the Quran, from the story of Balqis to the story of Maryam, to the story of Aisha, to the story of Sarah, Hajar, Eve, Zulaykha, Hafsa bint Umar, Khawla, Jamila, the wife of Lot, and Sophia bint Hayy, one comes up with these final remarks. Women are responsible for their own deeds as much as men. Women and men are partners in building societies, very much like you see with Balqis, you see with Mary, you see with other women. Women have a role in social and political life, very much like we have mentioned. Spouses ought to live in partnership and love. Men must not abuse their power. These are, for me, the concluding remarks of what and how the Quran presents the stories of women in the Quran. I conclude by saying, my friends, I know I have not walked you, I have flown you with 500,000 miles an hour through the stories of women in the Quran. I hope you do not expect me to do all the stories and do justice to them. I just wanted to give you a taste of what the stories of the Quran are telling us and how they inform our socio-political decisions, how they inform and shape our ethical values as the Quran demands. Number one. Number two, the Quran presents women as equal partners to men, and any verse that may contradict this principle is an ayah that has to be understood as ayah khassa, a specific ayah that speaks about specific context and must not become general. Questions in the coming 10 minutes? Yes, sir.
Are there interpretations of the Quran that are widely regarded as universally valid?
Yes. Yes, there are. I mean, if you come to my basement, believe it or not, who has been to my basement? No one. You are in trouble. Yes, one. To my, in the house. Really? You came to my house? No, in my house. I have about 15,000 books in my basement. Out of the 15,000 books, I have about 700 books of interpretation of tafsir. Some of them are highly regarded, like Tafsir ibn Kathir, Tafsir al-Alusi, Al-Tabtabai. These are well-regarded books. Tabtabai Tafsir is a Shia book of interpretation. I love it, I use it. And I use Al-Alusi a lot. I love it because it uses a lot of language and linguistic analysis of the words, which I love, without which for me does not give the true meaning of the words. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Yes, but there are plenty of them, In English, I advise you to buy one volume translation of the Quran called The Message of the Quran by Muhammad Asad. For me, that is the best, and so far, for me, #1 translation of the Quran that I highly recommend. There are other interpretations such as The Meaning of the Quran by Yusuf Ali. I personally do not like it. The Khan translation, I do not like it too. For me, Muhammad Asad is #1 translation of the Quran by Muhammad Asad. Yes, sir.
Spell his last name.
Yes, I'll come to you, I promise. Yes.
How do you spell his last name?
Asad, A-S-A-D. Can you raise the... A-S-A-D. I will write it for you now, and... Yes, Muhammad Asad, the Message of the Quran. Yes, ma'am. Yes, in the back. No? Okay. No. Yes, Ivan. I told you I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah. I have a question
Yes.
about your interpretation about God creating man and woman together.
Yes.
Because there's a verse in the Quran and it says, وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا.
Yes.
And the Muslim feminists take that to say that God created woman first because zawjaha means her partner.
Yes.
And so the man is a derivative from the woman. I've seen this as an interpretation by Muslim feminists, but you didn't address that verse, so I was curious.
That's the verse I was talking about, by the way.
Okay.
That Allah created us min nafsin wahida,
Yeah.
min
نفس واحدة.
nafsin wahida,
وخلق منها.
from the same essence.
No, from one self.
Or,
one soul or whatever.
no, but nafsin wahida could also mean united essence in Arabic.
واحد. One.
Again, it depends on how you will identify it, back to language,
Of course.
Yes, of course.
It's all in the language.
I go with the interpretation of Alusi,
Yeah.
that this means the same essence. Alusi
Okay,
calls
that's
min
fine.
jawharin mutashabih.
Okay, so what do you do with the
So
last
here's the
part
word
of
jawhar,
verse?
which means essence.
That's fine. Even I will give you that. What do you do with the next part?
Right?
وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا.
Okay. So what is this nafs wahida according to Imam Alusi? That's exactly the pile. He said, this nafs wahida, this is nafs wahida. So God put all of this essence together. This is nafs wahida. And He created out of that essence the human being. Adam and Eve at the same time. This is what Alusi
So
argues.
you don't buy the feminist interpretation.
No, for me, with my due respect, it is giving superiority to one over the other. And also I'm saying, why should I say the woman is better than the man or the man is better than the woman? If we take that hadith seriously, this pile and Adam and Eve came out at the same time. For me, this is much more universal, much more inclusivist and respectful to all, on the account that we are all equal, not that the man is better than the woman or the woman is better than the man. Yeah?
I thought after 2.5 hours I was done with their class for the day.
Yeah, and you wanted this, Adam and Hawa. Okay, other questions? There was someone there? No? Other questions? Other questions? Yes?
Can you explain to people why you're called by yourself the Feminist Imam?
Am I?
You are.
Astaghfirullah azim. That's my sin. No, listen, I don't, people can call me anything they want. For me, as Yahya Hendi, as the Imam, I'm shaped by the verse I mentioned in chapter 4, verse 1, that we all come from the same essence. And along with that, there's a beautiful hadith in which the Prophet said, and if I try to control myself, that God named the womb of the female after God's name, Ar-Rahman. That if what distinguishes a woman from a man, if the womb, then the woman has the best of God's attributes, God's mercy. So if you want to know God, look at the woman who represents in her womb the best of God's qualities and attributes. So when I read that hadith, it touches me. And it says, Yahya, to be a good Muslim, you need to bow down in respect and adoration to women, through whom I come to know the very essence of God, the God of mercy and compassion. So I have become a voice for women because my faith that I read in the way I interpret Islam means nothing but that. So when I say الظلم ظلمات يوم القيامة, that injustice leads you to live in darknesses in the life to come, if you go back to that, trace that hadith, it's about those who wrong women. If you want to be one with God, you have to stand up for women's rights. This is not Yahya theology. For me, this is my way of understanding my faith and my Islam. And I will never die. I will never compromise on that principle. When I call that feminist, call it. I call it that being true to God and to myself. After all, I came out and was made and fabricated in the womb of that woman. I put on my Facebook a message recently said, the woman is my mother, the woman is my wife, the woman is my daughter, and the woman is my mother, Hawa. So who am I without the presence of women? So I understand the Quran exactly in light of that, Dr. Ivan.
Yeah, but we like it the other way.
The other way around.
That God first created a cell which was female, and from it the male was male. That's what the Quran says.
If that makes you happy, good.
Exactly. No, that's what the Muslim feminist women
But for
are
me,
saying.
for me,
I'm not making it up.
I was in a discussion about women's rights in New York. I was one of only 2 men in a gathering of almost 500 women. And I told these wonderful women and amazing sisters, I said, you are talking to yourself. You are reaching to the car. You need men to be with you at the table to change their minds. Isn't that true? Of course. So what I'm saying is, why should I argue I'm better than you, or you argue you're better than me? I came before you came before. Why don't we argue, as the Quran says, minhuma, from both of them, you both, kilakuma. Isn't that more inclusive, more loving, more embracing of both? Yeah. Yes. لا يعني هذا الوقت بدي أسئلة كثيرة. الشاميين بيطلع لهم. نعم.
ابن عربي لما بيذكر صفات الرحمن، صفات الله، هي صفات أنثى وذكر وليس رجل وامرأة. دائما عنده يعني في فرق بين الذكر
هو مش أنثى وذكر، هو مؤنث ومذكر.
أنثى وذكر وامرأة ورجل. في الإسلام في فرق يعني بين الأنثى والمرأة والذكر والرجل.
صحيح.
هذا ابن عربي يعني حكى عن هذا الموضوع كثير. السؤال هو انه هل هي صفات الله تحمل صفات الانثى والذكر؟
No, I would say.
Explain the question.
Yes, do divine attributes carry within them the feminine aspect or the masculine aspect. And I would say, as I understand Islamic theology, is God is a samad, the unique in God's transcendence. And because God is a samad, we are a reflection of God, but we are not God. Within us, you see the impact of God's making because we are made by God. So within us, you have the divine attributes. Does God have our attributes? I say we have God's attributes. God does not have our attributes. So we appropriate or take on divine attributes. And you see that in the Bible and in the Quran. إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَلَقَ آدَمَ عَلَى سُورَتِهِ, in the hadith, that God created us in His own image. So to know God, you need to know us, because we are a tangible, materialistic thing you can see in order to know God. But we will never mount up to become God.
Last question.
Yes. Last question? Okay. My friends, you have my email and my Facebook, and I hope you come again for the next discussion. The next discussion, in a month from now, will be about fiqh and usul, meaning how do we actually make fatwas, and how do we think about Quran and Hadith to make ahkam and rulings.
That's not the topic. So, I'm the program coordinator, so let me tell you.
Okay, tell you.
Just a moment of your time, please. I just want to make a few announcements and then we'll let you go. So the next seminar in the series is actually on Sharia and Sharia phobia. Right, so the Islamic law, what people understand to be Islamic law at least, and the phobia around it. And that will take place if you pick up one of these forms. Either you pick one up on the way in, or I ask you to pick one up on the way out. You'll see all of the details. But we'll be here again the same time. It's also going to be on a Tuesday. We will have dinner. We will have coffee, more food and more coffee.
Nasir, how dare you argue with me?
You told me this first. That's the funny thing. Okay. So you'll find those details.
Dictatorship,
here.
Islamic dictatorship.
Okay, and then I want to remind you, where's the registration clipboard? It should be here somewhere.
Yeah, it's here.
It's right here. If you did not sign in, if you did not put your name on this registration form, please do so before you leave. This is the only way that we know how much food to order in advance, so that we don't run out, and so we bring enough coffee and whatnot. Please do that. Let me see here. Two last things. So as you walk out, you'll find two boxes, okay? One of them is our suggestion box. Please, if you have a moment, take one of these suggestion cards and write down some thoughts, comments, evaluation of how things went tonight.
Evaluation? Come on, man.
Yes, if you plan to come next time, is there something you'd like to see that's different or like to see again? Okay, and then the last box that you'll find here, the important one, the heavy black one, is a donation box. We ask that everyone donate $5. It's voluntary, obviously, you do not have to, but we ask that you make a contribution. We did not have a co-sponsor this time, so it was pretty costly for the chaplaincy. It would be great if we could make up some of that, and it would help us continue the program throughout the entire year. There will be one seminar every month, okay? Last thing is
before you do it, if you need the DVD with the CDs, they are online for $12, here for $3.
Nader is going to make an announcement about a vigil that's going to take place. Go ahead.
This will be very quick, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. My name is Nader. The MSA is actually partnering with a few other organizations to organize an interfaith prayer vigil. As you guys know, on September 11th of this year, I should say, Ambassador Chris Stevens was killed in Libya after the anti-Islam film was released and viewed there. Ambassador Stevens was a personal friend of Imam Hendi's, and we will be holding a vigil in his honor. He was a great representation of our great country. and espouse the same values that Georgetown tries to pass on to us. So if you can make it out, it's tomorrow, Wednesday, September 26th at 8 p.m. and it will not take too much of your time, but if you can just honor the memory of this, of a man who should be a model for all of us here, we would certainly appreciate your presence.
Thank you. So last thing, online,
Red Square, right outside actually, ICC.
You can find this entire video, hopefully by the end of this week, available on our YouTube channel. You can look us up, GU Muslim Chaplaincy. You can also find our Facebook page, our Twitter account, and our website if you just type in GU Muslim Chaplaincy on Google. Okay? Thank you very much for attending. Have a wonderful night.